So don't just look at this, some crazy guy become the president of the US and is doing all this because he's an idiot. That's not the case. Trump is receding back to the Americas and strengthen it and as a base to make America great again. It's the first time American leaders accept the reality of a multipolar world. Now, Trump also has a similar saying that, we can get up together with China, we can solve a lot of problems in the world. The Chinese didn't take this up. China doesn't want to be manager of world affairs. I think this position is being challenged by the reality. A lot of people's reading of the situation or reading of Trump's behavior. Now, what they say that this guy is crazy, he's irrational, he has no knowledge, didn't study, didn't read any books. Most of them are true, okay? But I think it's very dangerous to look at the Trump behavior at this level because it's not just Trump, okay? He articulates his understanding of issues and situations quite consistent first, okay? You can say that his argument is bullshit, he lacks any theoretical basis, and he switch all the time. But the basic argument and the conclusion Trump expressed has been consistent. Now, the MAGA movement, okay, make America great again. I think people miss the main issue. This slogan actually admits implicitly that America is no longer great now, and they have to do something to be strong and great again. That's what we are facing. His policy, you can criticize him the way he calculate, how much tariff they're going to put on this country or that country. But it makes sense because all it comes out, it reflects the trade imbalance between U.S. and China, U.S. and Vietnam, U.S. and Europe, by and large, not exactly, okay? So it's irrelevant whether this formula has a theoretical or very strict academic basis or not. His policy of imposing this tariff on this country according to this formula, I think that's what he needs. Okay, he needs some kind of standard to make this target. So my piece actually is arguing people who look at him, his personal character, his mental health, miss the point. And it's very dangerous to look at Trump's policy at that level. We have to look at Trump's policy, the fundamental elements that created Trump and created his policy. Now, Trump doesn't formulate this policy by himself, okay? He had a team. Whether this guy is legit or not is irrelevant. They have a whole scheme on how to deal with this trade situation. He has a whole scheme how to deal with geopolitics. America has to do something drastic. And the Biden administration or the Democrat obviously is not up to this, facing this situation. The issue, as the American side are dealing with, or Ray Dalio raised, they have two huge deficits which they cannot deal with. The trade deficit and the government deficit. And it's growing. And there's nobody wants to deal with it because the American politics is framed at every 4 years. So everybody's trying to deal with what's on the table, and they don't want to deal with the long-term problems. And that's the structure of the American political system. Everybody knows if we're going on like this, they're going to collapse. Okay? That's the problem they're facing. Of course, it's not just an American problem. It's a worldwide problem. Everybody has to face this problem, domestic problem of the USA. That's the situation. So don't just look at this as some crazy guy become the president of the US and is doing all this because he's an idiot. That's not the case. Trump is receding back to the Americas and strengthen it and as a base to make America great again. It's the first time American leaders accept the reality of a multipolar world. Okay? You can say the multipolar world is a reality, say, in the last 20 years. Okay? But all the American leaders up to Trump refuse to recognize this. And they still try to maintain, as Blinken would say, a rule govern the international order. The rules are made by the Americans, arbitrated by the Americans, and they want to keep their position, even though they recognize a rising China, a strong Russia. But Trump is the first time say, no more. We don't want to mess around with Europe and other places where they are taking advantage of us because we are shouldering the burden without much benefits. So there's a huge change in the U.S.-European relationship. U.S. is not withdrawing from Europe. I don't think so. It's actually asking Europe to take up their responsibilities, and U.S. is no longer the godfather of Europe. A lot of people are saying what the U.S. doing is back to the Monroe Doctrine. Well, right. The Monroe Doctrine is America is Americans America, meaning America, North, Latin, and South America belongs to USA. Now Trump is back to this position again, but he's more than that. He'll get rid of outside elements in Latin America and South America. That means China, okay? Because we have a lot of activities in South America and Latin America. Doing the Panama Canal actually is not a national policy to run those ports, but that's the fact on the table. Second, he wants to strengthen this base by acquiring Greenland and Canada. So my feeling is that they're going to acquire Greenland, not buying it, but in the mold of Puerto Rico, become a commonwealth, a part of America in terms of defense and foreign policy, and allow Greenland a high degree of autonomy, self-rule, and probably enjoy a lot of benefit. Like Puerto Rican can work in the U.S. He cannot vote, but he can travel between Puerto Rico and the U.S. He can work, take a job in the U.S. Anywhere you want. Enjoy a lot of benefit of American citizen, but you are not a citizen. They can easily do that, I think. Canada is a little more complicated, but the Greenland situation is much more viable because the basis is only, 57,000 inhabitants, and most of them want independence, okay? They want to get away from Denmark. That's the basis. But you cannot have a 57,000 population, real independent country. So you have to align with some power. The most likely and most beneficial power they can align with is the US, not Denmark or EU. So I think this can happen possibly in the next 4 years before Trump steps down, if he has to step down. And that's mainly because the US domestic politics. So this recognition of a multipolar world and the US only one of the polar changed the whole game. And Ukraine, you can see the change quite clearly. The focus, of course, is on China. Russia will be a player, but because of his limitation, this triangle of US, Russia, China will be the first tier of this multipolar world, with Europe, India, Brazil as a second tier polar. This is going to be a messy situation, a very dangerous situation. That's another issue I raised, that we have to face with this and see how this would affect and how our different policy has to be readjusted to this new reality. As I understand it, China doesn't want to be the big boss, okay, or any boss, okay? When some people in the Kissinger Associate, the rumor suggests that China and America, meaning that US and China can pair up to be the manager of world affairs, China rejects this. Now, Trump also has a similar saying that, we can get up together with China, we can solve a lot of problems in the world. The Chinese didn't take this up, okay? China doesn't want to be manager of world affairs. I think this position is being challenged by the reality now. Okay, whether I think we should have a very deep discussion about our position on international relations and geopolitics. We stick straightly to UN principle of nation-to-nation relations, right? And we have a clear position of not making alliance with any other countries, particularly military alliance, no military alliance. We should have a very deep discussion on this position and how this position will face the new reality of the world, whether it's possible to continue or what kind of change it need to be made to this. This is a huge issue that China, I think, is facing in this area. Continue our position it sounds good and sounds nice, and it's really our position. But is it possible? First, I think the world would not look at China the way we look at ourselves. Not just the US, okay? Any other country, as the second world, the third world, the developing world, our neighbors will not accept this, even though it sounds nice. Yeah. Even though China consistently proclaimed this policy, and you can hardly find our actions, any actions, are not consistent with these policies. But despite all these facts, countries all around the world will not believe in this because their experience in the last hundreds of years, this is not the reality. This is sad, but that's human history. So they would not accept this benign country is a good guy, didn't mess around with us, and any relationship with him are good for both sides, our narrative. And that's actually what we are doing, but that's not how other countries are seeing us, despite, whether they like us or they dislike us. That's, I think, the reality that Beijing has to deal with. Now, what's going to happen in the international financial activities when the dominant reserve currency has a huge credibility problem and it's collapsing? What would happen? It will be a mess, okay? Because nobody wants to take up their position. The euro doesn't want to take up it. The Japanese are definitely out. The pound is out. So the Americans' view is the only RMB can replace US dollars. But they're very clear about this. We are not doing it. The RMB is not trying to replace the US dollars. Okay? But the objective situation may not allow this to continue. And that's happening, okay, with what Trump is doing. Even though I don't think he's up to facing this reality. The US view is that we are the dominant reserve currency. Chinese is a possible replacement, but they are not doing it, so we are safe. Okay, all this talk about the decline of US dollar is not supported by facts. They are still having 60% of the reserve, country reserve. Nobody's going to replace them, okay? They are not as big as the old time when they were 80%, okay? Now they're down to 60%, but they're still 60%. They're not down to 40%, 30%. So they're still the dominant. The RMB is only, 2%, 3% of international trade settlement. And we are facing what they call a Hindenburg trap, meaning the big power refuse to take up public responsibilities to manage the order. And then we have a collapse of an existing order. That's what we are facing now. Okay? The US like to keep their position, but they are increasingly difficult to keep it because of their own behaviors. And we, as a second biggest economy, actually it's the biggest by PPP, refuse to take up that responsibility. So you have a void. You're going to have a void in international finance and trade. And that's what Ray Dalio is talking about, that the existing situation cannot be sustained. And there's no viable replacement schemes or suggestions. And China is not going to take up this role. That's the situation we are facing.